Hey everybody, Glenn from Third Millennium. Going to do a slightly different video. We just picked up recently a new test Miata for our work, a 2012, one of the NC series, and it's a 2012 sport model. Has the appearance package. We'll get a couple of videos of that so you guys can see it. It's really nice Miata. It's got the mica blue paint on it, and it's going to be a good car for us to do some project work on, and we're going to have a bunch of videos about that. It's also going to be a lot of fun to drive around, of course, so we'll also have a good time with that. So that adds to the fleet. One of our first things we're going to do for this car is we're going to install a really nice stereo system into it. And so what we thought we'd do to make it a little bit more interesting is we would shoot a video of the whole process. And so we're going to start out with this video, where I'm going to take a couple minutes, show you what we're going to install, and go over a little bit of strategy. We're actually going to break out the wiring diagrams for the car, where we can go over how to do some things that we've had some questions about from some owners, like where do we attach the the power supply for an external amp and those types of things. So let's take a few minutes, and I'll get the camera focused in on the workbench here, and let's talk about what it is we're actually going to put into this car. Alright, so here we go. What we decided to do on this Miata was put in a nice Pioneer unit. This is their ABH601EX. Has a number of nice things in it, including Bluetooth, of course. It's got a full interface for whatever type of smartphone you might have. Motorized front screen for access to a DVD, CD insert, HD radio technology. So this will be a nice unit to put into the car. Now, we decided we're going to couple this with this amp. And the reason we picked this amp, we get a lot of questions from people about recommending amps in a Miata. This one we actually like. The strategy is going to be, we're going to use the amplifier built into the radio just to drive the rear speakers. Now, on the third generation Miata, a lot of questions about the rear speakers. We're going to do a separate video on that. But for the purpose of what we're doing now for the install, we're not going to focus so much on what those speakers are as getting this system into place. We are going to use our M800 speakers for the doors, and we'll cover that in detail for you as well. But this amp, this is also a Pioneer amp. This is a GM-D1004. What's unique about this? A couple of things. One of the main things, of course, with a Miata is getting something that's actually going to fit into the vehicle. Now, this is about the size of a brick, which makes it really nice for installation behind the panel, and weight-wise, probably a little over an amp, or excuse me, a little over a pound. And they've got a setup with a couple of clips for mounting this into a firewall. We'll actually get into the car a little bit, see where exactly we can put this. But the thing that I found really appealing about this, and by the way, you can disregard what it says on the box about the 400 watts max. I mean, again, that's a meaningless number. That's an instantaneous peak number, that doesn't really mean anything in the real world. What really is interesting about this, though, is it's actually a 4-channel amp, 4 discrete channels in here, and it is, if you're familiar with it at all, it is what you would call a Class D amplifier, which is a fairly efficient amp, which is getting a lot of use in car audio systems because of the efficiency of it. And because we have 4 discrete channels, but we're only going to use 2 for the left and right doors, that means we can actually bridge, and that's built in with a selector here. We can actually bridge the outputs on this for the for those two channels, and we should be able to get a pretty clean 30 or 40 watts on this. We'll do another video where we'll actually test this amp, but in general, the thing with car amplifiers, if you know a little bit about electronics, you're working with 14 volts when the car is running, the alternator is running, so there's an actual limit you can get in the output power, which is why most radios, regardless of what they say, put out 10 to 13 watts of power. Most external amps like this will step the voltage up before they then use that. That gives them the capacity for a little bit more power. This has a 15 amp fuse in it, so it's a pretty much giveaway that realistically what you're going to get out of this is 30 or 40 watts. But if you can get 30 or 40 watts of clean power, not a 10% distortion or some ridiculous number like that, it's going to sound pretty good, especially with our M800s. You'll get really nice bass out of it, and you won't have to resort to a huge amount of money. I think we paid $90 for this thing. This is the right size for a Miata. Couple of selectors on it. There's a multi-pin for the output, and we've got a signal input, and they provide both RCA connectors, which is what we're going to use for the radio, as well as speaker level inputs if you needed it. It is set up, you could use this to run a sub. Most subs have a built-in amp at this point, and so for a Miata that's not terribly relevant, but we're going to use this in 2-channel mode. Going to run the RCA connectors to this. So this ought to be a nice little addition to the project. So we're going to use that, and we're also going to use a whole bunch of mounting accessories to make all this stuff work. Let's quickly go through those just so you see what it is we have to work with. First thing, steering wheel controls. We do have them in a Miata. Now, to be fair, the radio controls are about 4 inches from your hand while you're driving. So the idea of steering wheel controls is quite a luxury. But we do have this. This is from from Access. And this is the ASWC1, which is sort of a universal fit adapter. It comes with a small box that does all of the magic. Usually for this type of radio, there's only a couple of the connectors that we're actually going to need. It's got a access port here, updating the firmware in this, and then a multi-pin connector. We'll jump over to the computer because one of the first things you ought to do with these is update them. It's really nice, just like computers or a lot of other electronic devices. They do have updates that they regularly release for these, and the updates are generally fixes to things and direct support for the newer model radios, so that's a good idea to do. So we'll go ahead and we'll show how we do that as well. All right, then got to get this thing into the dash. This is the from Metra, the 997519B. So this is going to cover your Miatas from 2009 to 2015. It comes with a bunch of pieces, double DIN, single DIN. We're obviously going to be using this one right on the top here, single DIN, and then the AC controls down here. So this is really something you're just going to have to get with the product from Metra. A number of good suppliers have these. Amazon does, places like Crutchfield, which we actually like. Crutchfield can sometimes be a couple bucks more for the products, but they really do provide some pretty good service, and of course have these accessories. You don't have to go hunting for them as well. So that's another item that we've got to have. Then we've got the Metra. This is actually a vehicle harness adapter, 707903, and what this does, this allows us to, instead of cutting any wires, this allows us to plug directly into the wiring in the Miata. So we'll make our connections between this and the harness plug that comes with the radio, such that when we get out to the car, we'll mostly be just plugging things in and not having to do any work behind the dash or upside down inside the vehicle. So this will do most everything. A couple things it doesn't do. We're probably going to put a camera on the back license plate just for reverse, not because you need it so much for visibility in a Miata, although when the soft top's up, the visibility isn't as great in the back, so it's not a bad thing to have. But the reverse cameras are so cheap, we figured why not? Let's go ahead and do one of those as well. So we get this wired up. Then we've also got this little guy we're going to put into place. This is actually a bypass unit. Now, most of the radios that have displays in them have a safety feature where they disable the ability to play videos and so forth unless the emergency brake is set on the car. That's probably a pretty good idea anyway, but because that also disables a lot of the menus and so forth, and we are going to be using this as a test vehicle and want to be able to get to those, this little device, which they sell all over the place for about $15, actually defeats that purpose. We don't recommend doing that in your car. We think the idea of some reasonable safety stuff is some features like that is not a bad thing. So this, we are going to put this in, but it's not something that we're suggesting to you, but I want to go ahead and mention it to you as well. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to get the wiring diagram out. We're going to take just a second. We're going to look at the wiring setup for the Miata and strategize a little bit about how we're going to put this in, and specifically how we're going to power the amp. All right, here we go. This is the actual factory service manual schematics. We're going to look first at the audio system without the Bose audio from the factory. The reason we're going to look at this is we're going to take a minute, look at what the setup actually is in here. Then we're going to look at the Bose setup, compare the two, and it's going to give us a couple of insights, both in terms of dealing with the rear speakers and then also with how we're going to power things. First thing I want to point out here is this is for the 6-speaker type setup. The Sport model does have that. Most of the models that are out there do have that. There are a couple that do not just have the single door speakers. But this does have the rear speakers, and I just want to point out we do have discrete left and right channels going to the back, and we're going to actually make use of those. We've got our accessory fuse up here. We've got a 15 amp fuse here that we're actually getting supply to this audio unit. We have plenty of power for the audio itself, so that's not actually going to be a problem. Now, what I want to show you up here is with the Bose system, we have a couple of interesting things. One, you look here, there's a common connector in the back which delivers the rear channel to both speakers. It's actually the same signal, and they are connected in parallel, so the two rear speakers are only delivering a single channel of audio. So that's just something to factor into place, even if you replace the unit. And this connector is in the back behind the passenger's right shoulder. And that means in order to get true distinct channel sound back here, you're going to need to do some rewiring up here because there's only a single channel that's being sent back. One other thing that we point out about this is the Bose does have an audio amplifier set up discrete from the radio, and we're going to make use of that. If I come back here to the dash with Bose. Okay, here we go. What we see is there's an extra audio channel here that has a 20 amp fuse to feed the amplifier, and this is the fuse panel which is down by the driver's left foot. So we're going to take a look. We haven't actually done it yet, but we're going to take a look and see if this connector is there in the fuse box. Usually the fuse block is the same for all of the models of vehicles. They just may or may not have a fuse in it and the wiring in it. Sometimes even the harness is the same though. But that would be perfect for us because we need 15 amps for the amplifier, and if we can get it right off of that fuse block, then we do not need to run out to the battery through the firewall, and it'll make everything much easier in terms of the installation. The radio itself gets this same 15 amp input here, the same accessory over here, which is used for some lighting and some other things for the vehicle. So the setup for the antenna switching, which is powered on both the Bose and the non-Bose, that's about the same. So we'll get into that as well. But this is what our strategy is going to be. We're going to see if we can actually enable and get this 20 amp power here for our new Pioneer Power Amp. And if that's the case, that'll solve that problem very neatly for us. Hey everybody, Glenn from Third Millennium. We're continuing part 2 on our new stereo system install for our 2012 Miata. And what we're going to do right now is going to do some wiring on the bench. And this is primarily a soldering job, although you can also do this with crimping if you've got a good crimper and the proper quality crimps. We think soldering is really the way to do this. And in fact, if you're not familiar with soldering, want to learn a little bit more about that, we do have a video. I'll leave a link here on this channel for you, which would show you exactly what you need to do the soldering for something like this. We even sell a basic soldering iron and the correct solder for automotive use. So check that out if you want to get into it. We're not going to spend all of the time. This is going to take a fair amount of time to do all of these connectors, but we're going to tell you about the strategy for how we would approach this. We have the wiring adapter that plugs into the vehicle's plug. We have our bypass for that reverse switch. We have the amp connectors here. One of these is for speaker inputs, one is for RCA inputs. That's the one we're going to use, so we won't need the speaker inputs, so we can set that aside. Then we've got, from the actual head unit itself, we've got the connector for that from the Pioneer unit. And then we've got for the steering wheel controls as well. As a strategy, there's a lot of wires here. It can look a little bit overwhelming. The way to approach this is to work with the devices that you have one at a time. For example, on the vehicle harness, the color codes are on the back here for how they interface to the vehicle. So for example here, we're going to be using the amp to run the right front speakers. That means that these are going to go directly to the amplifier harness. The rears are going to go directly to the radio. So the way to approach this is just one at a time. Work through the connectors, making the connections to the other harnesses that you're working with, making sure we're going to put heat shrink over each of these as we do them. If you don't do that, get some good electrical tape and use that for covering after you've done your soldering. So basically just go through all of these, checking them off as you do them, and then going ahead and insulating any of these that you don't use. And then for the other connections that we have here, they're going to give you a lot of extra wire on some of these. So for example, on the amplifier, they give you all of this, it's probably 3 feet, to connect to the speakers and to the amplifier power and so forth. Obviously, if the amplifier is going to be close to where the radio is going to be, you don't need too much of this. Now, one caution, don't sit there and say, well, I'm going to put it right next to the radio when you haven't actually scoped it out yet to see if that's possible. It may have to be offset a little bit under that dash area someplace. Keep in mind, these are all speaker level outputs, so the distance really doesn't matter too much here. If you end up with some extra wire after you get your installation done, you can simply fold up the extra, wire tie it off, and then tie this bundle into an existing bundle so you don't get any rattling around. But you don't want to run the risk of cutting these off in advance because you don't think you're going to need it and then later finding out that you do. RCA is different. You want to keep these as short as possible, but we're going to run from here to the radio with an RCA to an RCA cable, which isn't usually included in the kits. So you may need to pick up one of those. And again, we're only doing this for one channel, so we're only going to use a pair of these for the amplifier. And then for the access controller, there's really only 3 wires. The way that access works, as you saw when we did the firmware, you can actually download software for updating the device, and then you can also get what they call the vehicle-specific instructions, which identifies exactly what vehicle you have and what you need to do. And in this case, we're going to need to attach the black wire and pin 1P of the vehicle radio harness to a chassis ground, red wire to power, and then the white-green wire again to the vehicle radio harness. So we're going to pick those up off of our Mitra adapter that we had, and in fact those are those 2, the blue with white and the blue wires right there. Alright, got our Axis steering wheel control here, and first thing we're going to do with this is we're going to actually update it. The module that comes with this has a USB port on it and allows us to get the latest firmware and updates for the product installed. There's a little access cover here. I already had it pulled off. You can see the USB jack like that. And then we'll go ahead and get the Axis software started. All right, and yeah, just a note on this, you do need to actually run this as administrator on your PC for it to work properly. First thing, we'll check and see if there is a firmware update available. All right, already got the latest version. That's great. Main menu, terms of configuration. You can have this do an automatic or manual. We're actually going to be doing a Pioneer, and I'm going to write that to the system. All right, good enough. Alright guys, so here we are. This, by the way, is our newest addition to our fleet of Miatas. This is a 2012 Sport that we just picked up, and pretty nice shape. Kind of replaced the top, got a couple of tears in the usual places on this, and we'll get a video of that, but only got 37,000 miles on it. So it's in nice shape, and take a look at the radio with you. Alright, so this is pretty much the stock radio setup. They had a number of different trim levels. This is the one that has a a full range speaker in the door, and then a tweeter mounted, and it also has the two little speakers here in the back. We're going to do a separate, whole separate treatment on those because we are developing a replacement product for those. What we're doing today, of course, is we're going to work on the radio, and we'll also get those door speakers out of there. They're pretty horrid sounding on these trim cars. Actually, all of them were. For the third generation, the Bose is pretty awful as well. So we'll get the top down, get ourselves a little bit of working room, start taking out the center console and the old radio, and get into the replacement. Alright, so looking at that little fuse panel here, see if we can get a circuit here to use. I got three, interesting here, I got three conductors going in, but I've only got two fuses on this block. I'm going to look up in the wiring manual what we've got here, but I see some pretty good size gauge wires. So there might be something here for us to use. So we'll take a look at that first. Of course, our worst case scenario is we might have to run a line back to the battery, but I'm thinking we may not need to do that. So let me investigate this one a little bit further. Alright, we got the camera set up, so let's start. So we've got a couple pieces to party up, and then a couple of screws, I believe. Now, this is for the 09 to the 015. If you have an 06, 07, 08, you don't actually need to pull the console off. You can actually just get at the radio and the climate setup from in the front, which we'll do at the end of this process. But for the later years, we got to take that center stuff out. So let's get on that. And these side pieces want to pull back. There's just some clips that are holding them in place. There we go. Alright, the next trick is we got a couple of screws on the sides here we want to remove, and same on both sides. Alright, so now we got a bolt on the back that steadies that. So we got to take off the panel here, the sort of knee panel, drives compartment. And we got a couple of screws in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That we got to get out so that we can get at the bolt on the side there in the back. Alright. Okay, so we'll call it 4 screws. Alright, what we got now is a 10mm bolt over on this side. That. Way up in there. So I'm thinking a nice extension here will do the trick. And if we've done everything right now, we should be able pull this out. Let's see what I got here. Alright, got a couple connectors to take off. And there we go. Alright, here's the radio cavity. I didn't realize it, but this is actually held with just a little push fastener down here in the bottom. And once you actually let that thing out, then you got plenty of room to work with this to put it together. Other than that, not much here. We got the duct work for the vents. We have the front speaker set up. I don't think there's anything in this one, and that's really only for the phone anyway. And next thing we're going to do, I'm going to take this glove box out, and we're going to see what sort of space we have underneath and behind in there for our little amplifier. Again, it's pretty small, but we do need to find some place to put it, and our experience with a lot of the other Miatas and then some of the older imports and so forth is usually a little bit of room back in there. So we're going to see if we can go for that. So let me get the camera back on the tripod for you guys, and we'll continue along. Alright, looking around here, I think I could probably cram this in someplace. There's room on the side here, some under that false floor back there. But I'm actually liking the idea, given the gaps I'm seeing here, I'm actually liking the idea of putting the amp right into the back of the glove box. We got plenty of cable, no problem. Tip it down to get access, fuse, and some of the other connections. So let's take a look at that. All right. I am definitely liking this. Right in the back of the box, doesn't weigh much anything anyway. Just on principle's sake, I put a sheet of aluminum underneath just to act as a heat sink, help with a little bit, because this will get a little warm. And but there's plenty of air moving around over the top of it, so I'm not worried about that. So, easy to get at the stuff here. All I have to do is plug the harness in on this side, so that's no big deal. So yeah, I think that'll do it. All right, and I'm liking it because that's what you actually see in the glove box, unless you bend way down and look up inside. Probably dress those wires up with a couple of ties across the top, and then wrap the pieces on the end just so they don't get any rattling or anything. But I think that'll work out all right. So if we take a look at what we actually found here in our 2012, what we came up with is there are actually two 20 amp fuses down here when there should be a 15 according to this wiring diagram. So what that means is that, and clearly that top one marked 20 according to the legend on here, it confirms that that is for audio. So basically what that's telling me is they probably have, even though they'd specified originally a wiring setup without Bose, they've actually gone ahead and pre-wired for Bose, which if we take a look at this, the part that's relevant here is here's this 30 amp connector 05, and there on fuse block 2, which is the one down by the driver's left foot, there's that 20 amp, and the color code is blue coming out and going to the audio amplifier. So that means that this 20 here
is actually feeding the audio amp. And if we check the wiring, we do see a heavy blue lead there along with a green and a white with green. But the blue is the one we're actually interested in because that's what feeds the Bose amplifier. Now, Bose amplifier is in the trunk area on these, which is not a bad place to put an amp, especially if you don't have space. We've been tricky. We've managed to feed it into the front in the glove box areas. So where is then, you know, this connector, or how can we actually get at that wire? Well, if we look at wiring diagrams here, we see that the amplifier connector, flip this page, here we go. The amplifier connector on our car, C14 is over here, passenger footwell, and from the passenger footwell runs down underneath, and the amp is back in this area here. So this means that from this fuse panel, that blue lead just comes up, across, picks up a connector here, and then runs back. So we can go ahead and pick up the power over here, or we could pick it up over here. Either one of these is going to work for us. We got to feed it to the amp, which is over in here. I'm kind of inclined to take a look over here, see if we can find it, and if we can, either remove it from this plug, because we're not using a Bose amplifier obviously, so we don't need to worry about that. Pick it up here, make a connector. We've got plenty of lead on our amplifier hookup that we've pre-wired here, and go right into that connector. So I'm going to actually go ahead, pop off that little kick panel area there, take a look at that, see if I see that blue wire coming across as it's identified, and if I do, that's what I'm going to go ahead and use for the amplifier. Now, our amplifier, little Pioneer amp that we're working with, has a 15 amp fuse already built right into it. This is supplying a 20. Always safer to have a lower current. You don't want to have more than the fuse rating for the supply side. So this will work out perfectly. We won't have to touch this. We won't have to touch the fuse that's in the amplifier. We just simply have to make the connection to this blue lead, and we're going to be ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead, pop that panel off, and then we'll take a look over there and see what we find. Alright, so here's what they did. It is in fact the fuse over here for the Bose setup. They brought it to this first connector, C11. It's a big multi-pin connector right up behind the steering wheel, and then they did not extend it from there, so this sub-harness is not actually there. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring the amplifier wire over, cut it out of this bundle right here since it doesn't go anyplace, and crimp that into place. And of course you want to make sure you have the battery disconnected or this fuse out of the circuit. Better to just disconnect the battery on the whole car before you do this. I'll try to get you a shot of that from underneath the dash, but it's pretty painful to get under there. But if I can get it for you guys so you can see it, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. Alright, underneath here. And that bundle you're looking at right there, that big blue wire, that is the one. Comes in on this side, does not go out to the other side. This actually attaches to this cross piece, this metal cross piece that's there. I just got it pulled off to work with it. I've already got my yellow lead here ready to go, and we'll go ahead and see if we can get that cut out and crimped into place. Alright, so time to move the climate control out of here into the new Metra kit. Metra kit, by the way, comes both single and double DIN, so we do have to do a little bit of cutting on the plastic of that, but shouldn't be a big problem. But first thing we got to do is we got to take this part out, which is separate from the radio body itself. So I'm just going to put a cloth or something down here so we don't scratch anything. Right, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take this centerpiece out by making a couple of cuts on either side. I'm just going to use a hacksaw blade, just handheld, just to get out, and then I'll smooth the plastic off with a little bit of sandpaper. Ready to go. This has a piece that actually will snap in to finish anyway, so it doesn't have to be super neat, but got that ready. And I think we're going to need to put some side brackets on because this double bin, which they supply for holding the radio. Alright, that's what we got. Looks pretty good. Now, a couple of things we're going to need to connect on the back here. Let's take a look at that for a second. Going to have to put the microphone in for the hands-free. We're also going to use the we're going to lose the actual jack on the console for feeding in a headphone or something like that. So we're going to need to put that into place. And we do have USB here too for some for a pass-through for a device, antenna, amplifier inputs here. So we got a couple of things to still connect over at the car before we snap it all back together. So we're going to head over there to take a look at that.
All right. Okay, so got all the wires plugged on the back. What we did is I pulled, this radio is quite deep. It actually uses all of the space that's there. So I've pulled the harness pieces and all of the excess wire over to the side, including the little module that takes care of our steering wheel control, so that we can get at that. But we'll also tie up all of that wiring for behind the glove box to try to keep this as clear as possible. So let's go ahead and see how we fit. Microphone here for now. Putting the microphone up on the windscreen in a convertible isn't a good idea. It's going to be pretty well useless anyway, but I'm going to see if we can't find some better place. All right, so here we go. Doors are pretty much the same on most of the models that we've seen. You got to remove this cup here that's hiding a screw. Handle has to come off on the 06, 07, and 08s. It's actually a nicer door card than this. You just pull the top off to get a screw there. Here, you've got to pull this whole outside cover off. This is a clamshell, and you got to pry up at the bottom. And then there is one big screw in here, and then I think all we have are the push-in snaps that go all the way around the door. So let's go ahead. I'll pull these pieces off, and we'll get the card off. And remember, like most of the door cards, they clip over the top, so that when you get this loose, don't just pull it towards you. You got to lift it up, and you're going to need a little room anyway. We're going to have to disconnect power locks over here, and then this pops out. You can turn it sideways and leave it attached. You don't have to take the cable off, but you can get that off, and then the whole door card will come off. We'll also have to disconnect the tweeter. If you've got a model that has the tweeter separate here in the door, either on the Bose or the 6-speaker setup, that's actually attached to the card, whereas the bass driver is actually attached in on the door itself. So that'll also have to be disconnected. So disconnect the lock, disconnect the tweeter, and pull this out, and then you can just take the whole card right off to work on it. So we'll go ahead and we'll do this. The trick for prying these off, put some electrical tape around the screwdriver so that when you're prying here, you're not going to scratch the plastic on the door, because everything here is in fact plastic. So a little bit of tape helps to cover that. And for taking the door card off with the little push fasteners, you can do get a tool under there and so forth. I find doing it by hand works just about as well as anything. Just get your fingers underneath to get it started. And do not be surprised if some of the little plastic snaps in there disintegrate and break off, particularly after a couple of years. It's one of those products that is good to have a few spares on hand just to deal with. And then just lift up like this. We're being held now here by this piece. There are connectors on the top and bottom, which when you press them down will release this. So we can pull it out, turn it, and then slide it back through. And you can do that from the, you can reach that from the top, okay. I'm going to release the tweeter so that I can shift this back a little bit, make it a little easier just to turn that and get it through. And then just like this. And then power lock. And here you go. So on the door card, the tweeter is actually mounted right here. Our speakers are, if you have the M800s, they're already a two-way. If you have our M600s, they're a full-range speaker. You do not need to use this. This is overly bright anyway. Plus, when you have more than one point source, in other words, if you have speakers spread around, you don't get as nice stereo imaging as you do if everything comes from one location. So the imaging is also much better when you simply use our speakers. So what you can do here is you can leave this in place just to fill the hole. Just don't reconnect it when you're done. Tie off the wire on the back, and then just deal with the other speakers. So let's set this aside. All right, and let's take a look at what we got here. This is interesting. This isn't a stock. This is a Pioneer speaker, which I never would have guessed it sounds as horrible as the originals. So somebody at least tried on this car to put something in a little bit better than the stock speaker. I'll show you that in a second. But this really does sound awful, so we'll be glad to get this out of here. 4 screws, and the connector for this sneaks in the side here and goes in around the back. Speaker's actually falling apart as I'm taking it out. Hope they didn't spend too much money for it. And a couple of connectors on the back. Now these nasty people have actually cut off the factory wires to put these on, which is not a nice thing to do. But we'll go ahead and let me get this wire tie off, and then we'll see what we got here to work with. Okay, so this isn't uncommon. You get a car used. We did buy this one used. So you never know what a previous owner has done with it. Unfortunately, this sort of thing, this looks like this might have been a better effort than some. They are sealed connectors, try to help keep corrosion out. I still think it's better, of course, if you do what we do, which is have the proper harness on it so it just plugs in and you don't have to cut the wire, because you always run the risk of screwing up the polarity, the plus and the minus of the speaker lead. If you do that, you get phase cancellation from one side to another, and it ruins the stereo imaging and also makes weird dropouts in the frequency response or peaks. So you're always better off if you can keep things the way they are rather than do this. But anyway, what we can do, we've got 2 choices. We can either see about putting a proper harness plug back onto this, or we can take this off and put on the connectors that are the normal ones for the speakers here. This is what's called a 110 connector. This is a 205. We could crimp those right onto the end of this. These will fit in. There's 2 little notches that correspond to these notches. Put these, go just like this. So we'll have plenty of speaker wire if I cut those off and put the proper connectors on. So probably do that. For the NA cars and the NBs, we have the replacement harness available so that if somebody's done this, you can put it back to stock. For the NCs, we don't. And then, just in case you wanted to know, the stock speaker is a 5x7, mounts just like that. Same speaker for the NA and the NB. The only difference is the plug on the back. Terrible sounding speakers also. So let me shut the camera off, see if we can get a couple of those connectors and get them crimped on. All right. I decided to actually do it right, and rather than just crimp some pieces on, I actually soldered on the correct leads so they just plug onto the speaker. I did check the other side. The other side is the original factory speaker, so they just replaced one speaker, which also you'd never do because you'd have a mismatch in the sound, but both sounded terrible, so I guess it was a match. So really it didn't make any difference. In our kit, we do give you brand new stainless steel screws to put the speaker in. I'm just going to reuse them here, and we give you a roll of gasketing tape. You can either put it around here or around the back of the speaker itself. The idea is just to make a nice seal here. And I'm just going to go ahead and push these on. These can sometimes go on really tight, which is another one of the reasons why we like to have them all correct, so that you're not doing this up at the car. You can just plug the harness in. And if you use our adapters, there won't be any extra slack. There's no clearance problems, windows or anything. And then the screws shouldn't really matter the order to put these back in. Just be careful putting them in that you don't pop and push them through the center of the speakers. We've all learned that from experience, so don't do that. So I'm going to take the tweeter lead, and just to keep it from rattling around, I'm just going to tape it to this other connector up here. If I add some tape. And for those of you that have the Bose setup in the doors, the only thing that's different about the door is this plastic insert. In fact, these are interchangeable. This was really smart on Mazda's part to design them this way, because then depending upon the trim, they just put a different piece of plastic into the door, and it's just a bunch of fasteners, and you can actually pull it right out and interchange it. With Bose, this will be a round opening as opposed to the oval opening here. The 81 mounting kit we have works with either one, so it doesn't make any difference which you have, it'll work fine. With that said, you're ready to put this all back together. Normally this would go a lot quicker than it did, except having to fool with those wires, but again, this is what can happen when you get a car that's used or had even many previous owners. We get this a lot with people with the first generation cars. There's been all kinds of crazy things. When you put the door card back on, it's inevitable some of these plastic snaps stay in the door. We've got a handy dandy little tool here for pulling them out. You can also pull them out with a pair of needle nose without too much trouble. It's easier if you mount these back into the door card, so that then when you put it back on, you can just snap them into place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these are available from Mazda, and plus there's some aftermarket ones that are available as well. So let me go ahead and get the door card, and we'll put that back into place. Button it back up.
All right, got the door card back on. It's just the reverse of the removal. And actually going to do a little bit of listening. I can't do all of this on the recording because YouTube, if they see more than, if the computers pick up more than 10 or 15 seconds of copyrighted music, they actually get a little upset about that. So two things we're going to do, though. We're going to do two EQs. We're going to do one, the first one, which is with the car just sitting. Then we're going to do a second one, which would be with engine running, driving along, because the difference that you're going to get with road noise and so forth is fairly significant. So let's actually hear what we've got if we do this one with completely flat EQ. Let me just go up here, flat, and let's go ahead and give it a couple of seconds. I'm going to use Steely Dan. You want something that's really well recorded. These guys were fanatics about really good quality audio recordings. Everything that they did was good. So pick out something that you know well and that is really well recorded. Don't use FM broadcast or some crappy old CD that you just found around someplace. Yeah, okay, we'll pause it right there. Flat is perfect. That's the way the speakers were designed for the acoustic volume of the doors, and they sound great. Balance left to right. Let's see what I got here. I've got a little bit to the rear and slightly to the left. Zoom this in so you guys can see that. A little bit better. That's just personal preference as well. And again, as far as the EQ goes, just a flat response on that. Now, I already did a test driving Custom 1. What I actually did is, to overcome the road noise, I brought it up 6 decibels at 80 hertz, tiny bit at 500, 3 decibels at 500, and then between, this is 3.15 and 5K, I brought it up again about 6 decibels, and also a little bit at 12.5K. That's mostly just to help with wind noise. So 2 EQs, and it's nice when you have a radio that's like this, then you can, bounce back and forth between if you're just sitting in the car or if you're out driving, to get you a nice response. But turned out really good. Really happy with it. We still have the microphone to place someplace and the remote camera. We'll probably go ahead and take care of that in another video. Okay guys, that's it. Hope you've enjoyed this series of videos about installing the stereo system and the M800 speakers in 3rd Gen Miata. We'll do a couple of follow-up videos separate from this series. We'll do one with a backup camera and the mic for the hands-free phone. More importantly, we'll take care of these rear speakers. We have some products in development, and we'll go ahead and take care of that. And that's going to make a huge difference. What you get out of these rear speakers is crossed over so high, and there's really almost no audio benefit to it at all. So that'll be a huge improvement for the sound in the cars. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this. Hope this helps you guys out with your Miatas. Please subscribe to our channel. Give us a like if you found these useful. We've got the links down below, take you back to our channel if you missed any of the earlier episodes. We had 4 or 5, because we went into some depth on doing this install, so go back and check those out as well. And hope everybody does get to enjoy your Miatas, whatever year you have, and hope you enjoy the sound from 3rd Millennium. Thanks very much.